Well, Book Dragons, it's been a while since I have spent any time in the Shannara universe, and I am happy to say that I finally jumped back in. So, as you may or may not be aware, I'm a huge fan of Terry Brooks. I love the world that Terry has created in Shannara, and I finally jumped back in. And the end of last year, I read First King of Shannara. This is a prequel to the Sword of Shannara trilogy. So if you have read anything of Shannara, especially if you read it chronologically, you know that the Sword of Shannara trilogy is what started the whole thing. So this is a prequel. And I'll tell you my thoughts on it, whether or not I think you should read it. Before I do, though, please make sure if you enjoy my content, like and subscribe. Hit the bell notification to find out when I post new videos. And join my Discord because we can go much more in depth in my Discord. I do have channels set up for Terry Brooks where we can discuss Shannara, and I've got a lot of other book specific channels on there as well. So make sure to check that out if you have not. So if you are familiar with the original trilogy, at least, of Shannara, there are characters in First King of Shannara that are talked about in the first trilogy, in the Sword of Shannara trilogy. This takes place 500 years before the events of the Sword of Shannara. At this time, there are many druids in the city of Paranor, and they have become recluses. There was a devastating event called the War of the Races, and after that event, the druids have ceased to use or condone the use of magic for anything else other than basic study. Yet there are a few druids who prefer to keep an open mind when it comes to magic. Now, when you hear me talk about druids, if you're not familiar with this universe, the druids are basically the wizards of this world. They are the magic users, and many of them are philosophers and sages and protectors of the realm. Some of them are warriors, besides the fact that they can use magic. The only problem is the High Druid mandated that use of magic is forbidden. Those who try to push those limits tend to be looked on unfavorably. So that is the setting that we come to in First King of Shannara, and I want to tell you a little bit now about the basic plot. Many years ago, the druid Brahmin was made an outcast from the druids, from the city of Paranor, because of his more liberal views on the use of magic. He was more of a troublemaker and always wanting to push the limits of what the druids were allowed to do. This story takes place with Brahmin coming back to the druid order because he has realized that the Dark Lord Brona has started to brew a plan behind the scenes to bring about another war of the races, basically. And back during the original War of the Races, Brona was thwarted, or at least they thought Brona was thwarted. And Brona is a former druid himself, but he became obsessed with dark powers and became this holy other being. And so they thought they had destroyed him, but he is still in existence, and Bremen has found this out. And so he goes to the druid order to beg them to see the truth and to prepare to do battle against Brona again. One of the things that Brona is after is this ancient artifact called the Black Elf Stone, and one of the things that is foremost in Bremen's mind is to find the Black Elf Stone before Brona does and figure out a way to use the Black Elfstone to destroy him. And one of the ways he plans to do this is by forging a magic weapon that will turn the tide and destroy Brona once and for all. And along the way, he assembles a ragtag band of helpers, one of which becomes a new apprentice to him. This is very much classic fantasy. It's you're assembling a fellowship and you're going on an adventure together, with an adventure with purpose, right? To find these artifacts and destroy the Dark Lord and save humanity. And so, it's all of those classic tropes, but it's done really, really well. So let's talk about some of the characters real quick. Of course, we have the Druid Bremen. There is also the Dark Lord Brona, a former Druid himself. There is a human woman named Marith, who Bremen finds at the Druid city of Paranor. She has been taken in by the Druids in hopes of learning to hone her magic. She is a rarity in this world because she was born with innate magic. And it's a very powerful magic and very chaotic. She can't control it. There's another druid called Tay Treffenwood, who is an elf, and he left his homeland of the elves to study with the druids, and he is one of the few druids at the Citadel of Paranor that still trust Bremen and are still friends with him and willing to actually give him the time of day and listen to his warnings. And so Tay ends up joining the band as well. We also have Riska, who is a dwarf. He's also one of the druids, and he's a mighty dwarf warrior. He also is another friend of Bremen's that's willing to actually listen to him and believe what he's saying. So he joins the quote-unquote fellowship as well. There's also a human tracker called Kinson Ravenlock. He is essential to helping Bremen track different people and different areas that they need to go to find the artifacts that they need to make this powerful weapon. And there are 3 other characters that those of you who have read some of the Shannara universe will be familiar with. And one of those is Jurl Shannara. He is the ancient ruler of the elves that passes down the Shannara line. We also have Cogline, who is a philosopher and reluctant magic user, but he's more of a hermit. He just lives off to himself with his pets and really wants nothing to do with the world at large, but he does have some talents that Bremen needs in order to figure out how to forge this weapon. And then finally, we have Bremen's new apprentice that he meets along the way, and his apprentice's name is Alanon. So those of you who have read Shannara, you will be familiar with Alanon, and I won't say too much more because I don't want to spoil it. But for those of you who are familiar with the character, you know who I'm talking about. So I'll talk briefly about the magic. There's not a whole lot to say about it, but it is a soft magic system. There's not a whole lot of rules and regulations to using the magic. It just is. There's druid magic, which is pretty much just basic elemental magic, fire and ice and things like that. And then there's also Marith's magic, which is very similar, but it's much more chaotic. It's much more powerful in some ways, and it can do devastating things if it gets out of control. And she has personally had things happen in her life caused by her magic that have made her very reluctant to trust herself, let alone anyone else. And then, of course, you have magical artifacts. The elf stones are one of those. And also, well, I don't know if I dare say the other artifact in this. Well, I guess I can. This book will tell you about the forging of the Sword of Shannara. And that's all I'll say. What did I like about the book? I love the writing style of Terry Brooks. I always have. It's not super flowery. It's not extremely verbose. It's straight and to the point, but it feels very much like your classic fantasy writers like Tolkien and stuff like that. But it's more readable. It's more approachable by the average reader. So I really like that. I mean, my kids read some of the early Shannara books when they were in their adolescent years and early teen years. It's just a very accessible writing style. The magic is great. We already talked about that. It's very simple. It may seem tropey, and I guess it kind of is, but it works so well in the story. The characters are just wonderful, especially some of the characters, if you've read other Shannara books, gives you that nostalgic feel. It made me feel at home, like I'm coming back to my home in Shannara. I'm staying for a few weeks to hear this new story, and it's just very immersive. It really immerses you in the world very well. Terry Brooks does not hesitate to kill off characters. You will have some character deaths in this story that mean a lot. So just be aware of that. If that's something you don't like or that you would hope to avoid in fantasy, you're not going to avoid that here. There's some great action sequences in the book as well. I really love the way the artifacts are used, and especially certain artifacts. The journey to find those artifacts is really awesome. If I had any cons for the book, I would say that it's probably not as detailed as I would like on certain characters. It's very evident that Meredith is an important character in this story, but we don't get a whole lot of information about her. We get enough, but we don't get a ton of backstory on her. I would have liked to know more about Meredith. Bremen as well, and I will say this, the Druids are extremely mysterious, so you're never going to know a whole lot about the Druids. That's what makes them great characters. There's always something new that you're going to find out later on down the road that maybe you didn't know about them before. So we don't get a whole lot about Bremen here, but it's enough to keep your interest. I was a little disappointed at the end, the way it resolved. It was a good resolution. I wasn't surprised at all because I know what's coming after it, right? I've already read the Sword of Shannara trilogy. So I can say that if this is the first Shannara book you're reading, it will leave you with a resolution that may not be exactly what you were hoping for. But that's why I would say you should read at least the Sword of Shannara trilogy first before you read this. It's just better that way because you get the full story of what the Sword of Shannara is and does. It does talk a little bit about Bremen in the Sword of Shannara trilogy, but then you get to go back and read First King of Shannara and find out all this other stuff. I would recommend doing it that way personally, but if you have read a lot of Shannara books, but you have not read First King of Shannara, now is the time. I highly recommend that you read it. It's going in my hoard. It's not my top tier best books of all time type of thing, but it's a fantastic book. I highly, highly recommend it to you. There we go. Let me know in the comments, have you read The First King of Shannara? Have you read any Shannara for that matter? Tell me in the comments below. Ask me any questions you want to. I always forget to do this, but I'm going to do my very best to put a spoiler comment in the comments below and pin it so that you can spoil to your heart's delight in that particular comment section. Hit me up on Discord. As I said before, we can talk more about the book there. That's all I've got, guys. Make sure you are reading more books. I'll talk to you soon.